know, Sarah said last meeting she was doing this tonight. Yeah. I was just hoping I didn't get a call from one of the other guys because we have to pass this thing to publish the budget, so. And then it's a notice of hearing that we'll have our budget hearing on the 17th and review and public will have opportunity to give their input and those things. So.
I'd like to call the USD 489 Board of Education meeting for Monday, August 3rd, 2015 to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Motion to approve.
I motion to approve the agenda.
I second it.
Okay. And motion by Board Member Adams and seconded by Board Member Fox. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Motion carries 4-0. Big group tonight. Next item on the agenda is audience participation. This is our first and only opportunity for the audience to address the board. We ask that anybody to keep that to a maximum of 3 minutes. Do we have anybody that wants to address the board? Okay. Seeing none, we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is the school spotlights. Dean?
We do not have any school spotlight since we just met not too long ago, so
Okay.
nothing for this evening.
Perfect. Next item, report of committees.
No reports from committees.
Easy enough. Communications from other organizations.
We do have the Rec Commission's July meeting minutes that they provided for your review, and they are attached.
Okay. Report of superintendent.
Again, we just met not too long ago. I wanted to go over a little bit on enrollment. Elementary had their enrollment the last week, I guess. And we went through the numbers today, and they come out to, this is kindergarten through 5th grade, doesn't include preschool or anything, 1,474 students. On September 20th last year, we had 1,467. So a slight increase there, but those numbers fluctuate quite often. We will not end up with that amount right now, the 1,474. I can guarantee it'll be up or down the first day of school. I know they are still contacting parents and going through those things, and I don't know, Shannon, if you want any details on, I mean, we really don't know, other than I think our class sizes, we are anticipating more, so they're a little smaller than what we had anticipated, trying to even out those things. High school, middle school are enrolling this week. I know online is up and going, but for them, but they will physically be in the buildings then, and we're anxious to see those numbers, how they come out. This is an unusual year with the block grant that usually we're very anxious to see what our numbers come in because it all ties to our funding. This year's just the opposite. A lot of districts are hoping their enrollment is actually lower since it doesn't tie to that, but I still foresee after the courts hear this and make a decision that maybe we'll be going back and having to do, we have to do head counts and do all of that anyway, it just won't be audited, but so that may be changing. Enrollment, we had a few issues to start with. After we did the communicating with parents and how they could get into InfoSnap and those things, has gone well. I mean, all things considered, I thought it would be a lot bigger mess than what it has been, and principals are reporting that things went better than expected, actually. One of the issues we have is between InfoSnap and our student management system, Power School, and they are supposed to be partners, but yet trying to get them all on the phone or all together to resolve the issue has been a real challenge. So we're doing what we can and trying to get that issue resolved that way. Facilities, they did the striping on the track. That's complete. Lecture hall, I think there was an article in the paper, or one of the two, I don't know which one, I just saw it, but the picture of the seats, all of that stuff's coming along well. Things are getting done that way. Parking lot work is getting wrapped up. I didn't go to Washington today, but talked to Donna, and they are getting everything. They're organizing classrooms and getting things done there. So that seems to be going well. That's all I have for my report this evening.
Very good. Any questions for Dean?
Yes, question, and so if the number's looking at where we have sufficient staff to cover the classrooms?
14, yes, with what we have now, yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll look at middle school numbers and after
I
those
see.
come in, and yeah.
All right.
Very good. Next item on the agenda is financial reports. Tracy?
I'll just skip this part and we'll go over the budget on the new business, please.
Okay, perfect. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is board meeting minutes for July 20th, 2015, negotiation meeting minutes for July 27th, 2015, personnel transactions, approval of bills in the amount of $225,831.38, and the approval of the CACFP renewal documents. Entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay. Been motioned by Board Member Fox. Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay. Seconded by Board Member O'Borney. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I think in reviewing the minutes, I think it was item 10D. Pretty sure it's where it was at. Yeah, item 10D, and it's like the third sentence. And it says Schwartz asked if the handbook could be a working document. Negotiations haven't been finalized yet. And I think that would have been discussion by board members. It would have been a board member, current board member would have said that. It's item 10D on the minutes. Third sentence. PDF document. May have been page 9 of the PDF document. At least my copy.
It should all be the same.
Was this under the exec session piece?
No, this was in the discussion of the staff handbook.
Okay.
And D is third sentence.
Yeah, I see it there. I think that was actually Sarah that asked for that.
I'll go back and look at the
Okay.
audio.
Okay.
We will make that change to, it'll be on the audio.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to
That was
amend
it.
your motion to include that change?
I would like to amend my motion to include the change to section 10D based on Sarah's review of the audio.
Luke?
I would second that.
Okay. Moved and seconded with the amendment to that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next item on the agenda is new business. First item is the budget review. Tracy, I will now turn it over to you.
Okay.
As you know, it's quite a lengthy document, so I did pull out some pages that I just thought we should go over. If you have any questions, please stop me, and Dean, if you have anything you want to interject, please do so also. I printed it out for the board members. I will also reference what page it is on the budget document in case anybody would like to follow along that way. So the first one I'd like to go over is on page 98 of the agenda from the budget document. This is our general fund. Down at the bottom, I have highlighted the total expenditures and transfers. And as you can see from fiscal year 15, our total expenditures and transfers was $16.4 million. This year it is $19.3 million. We discussed this a couple weeks ago, that now that Capers and Supplemental General, which is also LOB, are transferring through the general fund, that has increased that number significantly. Our budget dollar amounts we're actually receiving in the general fund is less, but I wanted to point that out. If you see that large jump, that is why, is because Capers is now flowing through. And so on the next page, which is page 103 on the agenda, I've highlighted there the supplemental general and the Capers fund. You can see that the last 2 years there hasn't been any number in those columns. This is a new column that we now have $315,000 transferring into general fund, and then we'll go to supplemental general. Capers, same way. We'll go immediately into general fund and then right back out to the Capers. The next page I wanted to review is 128 on the agenda. It is our capital outlay budget. I wanted to point out that the resources available and our total expenditures of $3,789,000 do equal each other. We do not anticipate spending all of the $3.7 million in expenses, and I'll go over the full capital outlay budget here in a little bit, but I just wanted to point out that that gives us the authority, the budget authority, should there be something majorly catastrophic happen. We have the authority to spend that amount without having to republish our budget. But the revenue is correct, that's what we anticipate coming in, but we do not plan on spending nearly that amount, and we'll go over those numbers, but just wanted to point that out. The next thing is a Form 150. It's on page 186 and 187 on the agenda. 151. I'm sorry, it changed. It was 150, now it's a 151. This is typically what we use to get our funding. We plugged in how many virtual hours and everything else that we were going to have. So now they are only looking at waiting on virtual state aid, full-time, part-time, and then adult credits completed. So we have an estimate there of what we think those might be. Number 4 is the special levies. We're not eligible for the cost of living, but we do get the declining enrollment. Number 6, general state aid over proration. This is a $25 per FTE that they are, the legislature, it's my understanding when they came up with the block grant, they'd anticipated a certain amount of revenue, and that changed after the fact, and so they are going to give us $25 per FTE to compensate for that, so they didn't have to change everything. They said it'll be around 25. So we will have, our FTE will be audited for this purpose especially, just to make sure that we are getting the proper funding there. Let's see. Down below just shows our special ed, Capers, capital outlay. Those are all just numbers that come from our budget. Within, there's nothing there that is now calculated upon any sort of audit. And then at the very bottom, you'll see that $19.3 million is our budget authority and general fund. The next page, under Table 1, Number 4, it shows the less amount to fund the extraordinary needs. We'd also talked about this a few weeks ago, that 0.4% is being withheld from our budget to go to the extraordinary needs fund. For us, that equates to $54,000 that will go there, and then people can apply for it based on changes in valuations and increased growth in student numbers. Are there any questions so far?
Just, and maybe you don't, I'm sorry. With that extraordinary state need fund, if by some miracle the state doesn't allocate all that, do we get any of it returned back to us, or is it just kept in their fund?
I don't know. That's a good question, and but I don't
think
my guess is that they're going to have more need than they have money.
I'm expecting that.
Yeah.
I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, good question. I don't have an answer to that. I guess we'll find out if there's anything left over, what they decide to do with it. The next page is 197 on the agenda. This is our unencumbered cash balance by fund. So I highlighted the main funds I wanted to talk about. The general fund did have a cash balance of $4,700 at the end of last year, so as of July 1 of this year. Typically, that should be a zero balance in general fund. We had a purchase order that was encumbered in 2013 that flowed into 2014 and then never got spent. So we actually did have a balance of $4,700 that we were not able to spend, and so that will be a reduction that we don't get this year because it was never expended last year. And that. Supplemental general, $817,000 was our unencumbered cash balance. That is tax money that has been left over. We did not have the budget authority to spend any of that. Capital outlay, you can see, increased from $609,000 to $1.3 million. Food service increased from $378,000 in cash, unencumbered cash, to $405,000. Contingency reserve went from $99,000 to $331,000. And the special ed co-op, their unencumbered cash balance moved from $269,000 to $766,000.
And the co-op is Ellis, Victoria, La Crosse, and Hayes. I mean, and they all pay assessments into that fund. It's still not where it should be, but it's much better than the year before.
The next page is 59 on the agenda. This comes from our profile information section of the budget document. And I just wanted to point out the chart at the very bottom, a summary of our total expenditures by function. It's hard to read on the blue, but instruction is 66%, student support services 4%, instructional support 1%, administration and support 8%, operations and maintenance 10%, transportation 3%, food services 5%, and capital improvements 2%. So I thought that was important to show you what percentages of our budget are going to upkeep of our buildings versus instruction and administration and support and those kind of things. And the next three pages are page 81, 82, and 83 on the agenda. This is where we're looking at the history of our mill levy. In general fund, it's always a straight 20 mills. Supplemental general is actually going up just slightly from 16.114 to 16.158. Capital outlay stays at a straight 8 mills. And declining enrollment, we get a certain amount for that, and so the mill levy changes depending on what our valuations are and things like that. And so that's also going up slightly from 1.388 to 1.451. The no fund warrant we paid off, so we will not be levying any taxes for that this year. So it went from 0.739 mil to 0. So our total mill levy from last year at 46.241 will go down to 45.609. That's down 0.632 mils. So I think we're very fortunate to be able to say that. Most districts we're hearing from, they're having an upwards of 4 mil increase, and so ours is actually going down. So we're pretty happy about that. The next page shows our assessed valuations. We had talked about this, that Ellis County was down 3.8%. It went from $310,000 down to $299,000. And then again, the next page, I just wanted to point out at the very bottom, the sources of revenue. It shows our state, federal, and local revenue. You can see that it stayed pretty much the same for state, went up $400,000. Federal went up just a little bit, but our local revenues dropped from $17.7 million down to $14.8, and that is because of the flow through that our local revenues are now going to the state and then coming back. So it's a little misleading in that regard, but our total revenues are going down from $41.4 million to $39 million. The next two pages are the actual budget hearing document that we'll ask you to approve here in the next section of the agenda. This is the same information that we just went over on the history of our mill levies. I highlighted those so you can just see the changes, but those are all the exact same numbers that we just went over. The history was just a little bit easier to see it side by side, I thought, so.
This is the notice of hearing, which will be on August 17th, 6:30 in this room. And then that'll be the opportunity for public to give their input, and then we'll ask about approving this. We need to prepare the documents, everything to send to the county and the state after we approve it.
And this will be published in tomorrow's newspaper for the public. And then after that, the last 2 pages is actually the capital outlay 5-year plan. This seemed to work really well this past year, going over, kind of breaking down capital outlay so you could see what we had planned. This is on page 201 and 202 of the agenda. You can see at the top our revenue that we anticipate for fiscal year 16 on out. And then our leases are pretty standard. Those have been the same. I put down which years we are in payment of those. As you can see, like Hayes Middle School, the classroom additions, we're in year 4 of 10 and 3 of 10. And then maintenance, we take out salaries and benefits out of capital outlay for a portion of their salaries. Technology, we have listed what we budgeted for scheduled and unscheduled upgrades, our software, Microsoft licensing, and our copiers down in the copy center. And then on the next page, you'll see the Windows and Apple devices. Those will be, of course, year 1 of our 3-year lease payments on those. And then for buildings and grounds, Rusty gave me all the information that he's kind of got planned for the next year. Just one thing to point out, we have $375,000 budgeted for roofing needs. I believe that was the same as we had budgeted this past year, although we didn't spend all of that. Just kind of whatever the needs are, but that was our 5-year plan, was to get most of those upgraded and repaired. If you've got any questions on that, I'm sure Rusty would be more than glad to answer those. Transportation, we did have a 5-year plan last year to do bus, car, and suburban replacements. We sold the activity bus, so we're going to apply the $73,000 we received from that towards the purchase of a new bus. And so our total expenses that we're planning on spending in capital outlay is $2,967,000. And on the budget document, we had $3.7 million. So not nearly as high as that, but like I said, we just wanted to make sure we had the full budget authority in case some major system would go down and we would need to replace that. But we're not anticipating that at this point in time. Any questions on anything there?
I guess one question is, because there is a big discrepancy if people look at the difference between the prior 2 years and this year. Is there any clarification in case people aren't aware that it's a caper in and out flow through? Because that seems to inflate our budget when it truly is, we're actually.
And that's been a concern of us and all the other districts, that really, unless we get, we're trying to get out to the public as best we can. Would appreciate anybody that would like to help us in that regard, but it really is just getting it out to the public that's the reason why it's going up so high.
So are there any suggestions that the other districts talk about messaging this particular aspect of the budget?
Just communicating like we are on the radio. I talked about it after the last meeting. Do that again tomorrow, whatever we can do. And then at the budget hearing again, we will talk about the rationale or why it's that much higher, but open to suggestions on other things.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm wondering about, as board members, is there something we can do to communicate that this isn't a hyperinflated budget, this is in some ways just keeping us even keel?
And I think a lot of the public, or a lot of the media so far, when talking about the block grant, that it is a flat amount now. And also, there's been a lot of comments about that this may be the governor's way to show that it is an increased amount going to schools. So that may help too, that people may be aware of that situation and that it's not actually more money for the schools.
Okay.
Suggestions we
Motion.
definitely welcome.
Got to think about that one.
Okay, great.
Well, maybe our media people can help us out there with more of the word on getting that out. That would be greatly appreciated, because I can see some responding saying, not looking at what the background is, whereas the background is Well, we won't, I'll stay out of the political arena on that one. Okay. I'll stop.
Next item is the notice of the budget hearing, and Dean actually kind of covered that a little bit, but just to reiterate, we will meet on August 17th, 2015, that should be, instead of 14, at 6:30 PM here at the Rockwell Building for the purpose of hearing and answering objections of taxpayers relating to the proposed use of all funds and the amount of tax to be levied. We detailed the budget information, including budget profile, everything is also available here, and will also be available at that hearing, so.
The public notice is correct, that will go in the paper tomorrow. It does say
Okay.
2015.
Good. And the next item is the bond issue. We have representatives, I believe, from HTK here.
We'll actually need you to vote on that to publish it.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that was a vote, okay. We'll need a motion then to publish the notice of the bond hearing.
Budget.
I'll
Okay.
make a motion to publish notice of the
Okay.
hearing on the budget on August 17th at 6:30.
Okay. Been moved by
25th.
Board Member Adams. We have a second.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Board Member Fox. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Now we will talk about the bond issue.
And some of you probably haven't met Zach from HTK. He is one of the folks from HTK that did the legwork on with the Facility Needs Committee and went through all of those things for over a year probably.
Since about 2012, I think.
Yeah,
So,
couple years.
yeah.
quite a bit over a year, so, yeah, before my time even. So anyway, what we were talking about what our needs are, how we want to proceed, whether we're looking at a bond issue, those things. So what I wanted to do at this meeting, especially for the new board members, was to have them, give them an opportunity. Zach's going to review a little bit of what is in this report, but give them an opportunity to ask questions of Zach. And then we need to come up with, not tonight, we're not voting, I don't expect you to say, oh, we're going to do, a bond issue for this amount, but give you the background information, and then we'll come back in and have that discussion of how we want to proceed. So, Zach, you want to
Okay.
just kind of get us started there on a few things? And
Yeah, I think what you have in your packet there is it's the Facility Needs Committee report that we helped the Facility Needs Committee put together last year, and they kind of made their final reports towards the end of the year of 2014. So I'm going to run through that. I think you've probably had it for a while, but I'm going to run through and mostly hit on the needs that were identified throughout our process of surveying the schools, visiting the schools, touring the schools with staff, interviewing with staff, and then also the needs that were identified. The Facilities Committee did a similar process to understand the needs for them as well. So I'll flip through this. There we go. Some of this first part is just background information on the process that we've been through. So I'll kind of jump through that and get to where we were at with identifying the needs and looking at a potential bond issue. Kind of the charge from the Board of Ed back in 2012 was to look at what are your short-term and long-range goals, and kind of set the district on course for the next, it says 20 to 25 years, but even longer than that. As I said, both the committee and HTK toured facilities. We reviewed, met with staff, interviewed staff, and identified kind of what a list of needs and wants at each of the school buildings. A couple graphs here that indicate some enrollment numbers, and as Dean was talking earlier, kind of falling right in line with, I think the 15-16 year might be slightly lower than what these projections show, but still right in line with kind of where where things were at. So kind of what are some of those needs that were identified? A couple things that we really looked at is while attendance or while enrollment isn't necessarily increasing, additional need for either activities, special services that require more classroom space than, or less dense classroom space, I guess, than what you currently have. So that's really, while your enrollment's not increasing, you're having greater needs for space in schools, as well as just deferred maintenance. Throughout all the buildings, they've been well maintained, and summer update programs have gone throughout the years of upgrading lighting, upgrading ceilings, upgrading finishes, mechanical systems throughout. But some of those systems, as they've over the past couple of years, actually have started to become either they've met their useful life, they've it's starting to get more difficult to find parts to repair mechanical systems as some of the buildings have expanded, like at Hayes Middle School, starting to strain on kind of the overall electrical systems and other systems that support the building. As well as, again, some of those programs, industrial arts, participation in sports at younger ages, and then also a limited space for performing arts programs. Really, we have the 13th Street Auditorium here, but meets its capacity fairly regularly at events. So some of those, this is a little bit out of order from what so we'll just go through. Kind of and feel free if you have questions as we go through, jump in and ask those questions. These next kind of slides will show some of the specific needs and wants that were identified at each of the schools. At Hayes High School, talked a lot about performing art, providing a performing arts center that's strictly for the district. That would primarily be at the high school, but would be available for all the district schools. And that could be whether that's a tornado storm shelter as well, but all the schools lacked a adequate storm shelter. For the most part, lacked adequate storm shelters. There's areas within the schools that have been made to work for storm shelter capacity, but they don't have designated storm shelter
Do you have a
areas.
question?
Yeah.
With this with the fine arts, performing arts auditorium, how much more capacity would that provide over the current 12th Street auditorium?
I think it's about 300 or 400. This is what, 600, I think. Is it that much? I don't. This one was going to be 800 to 900 capacity.
Okay.
So it's not intended to fit the entire school body or student body and parents in the facility. Those typically the 8 to 1,000 range size is what we typically see in a lot of schools of this size, just because you get them too big and they're just more to maintain, more cost up front, more to maintain. And so the kind of the 8 to 1,000 range is kind of an ideal size for high school auditorium.
Okay. And that plan included the acoustical design as well as the lighting and things for
Yeah, it would be a complete auditorium, kind of a turnkey, I guess you'd say, auditorium that would be at the high school, but would be obviously serve the needs for all of the schools. Throughout the course there was discussion about what happens to this auditorium, what happens to the Rockwell Center. I don't know that that's fully figured out yet, but we had looked at several scenarios where the administration would move to various places. Potentially this site would be dispersed of.
Okay.
And so if that was the case, then that would include the auditorium as well. And so looking at the high school, the site-wise made logical sense that would be where an auditorium could exist. And also looked at some of the athletic facilities out at the high school specifically, and I know every year there's concerns about, do we have enough water to maintain the grass out there, and is turf a good solution for that? So we went back and forth, and in the end it did, as part of the Facilities Needs Committee, did was identified as a need out at the high school, was turf and other improvements out at the athletic facilities. At the middle school, it was one where looked at several schools you'll see, and you've probably heard that have shared cafeterias or inadequate cafeteria size, shared cafeterias with gymnasiums, limiting physical education and extending the hours that lunch is served. And so the middle school was a cafeteria, and additional cafeteria space, additional gym space, again, for those younger grades getting into sports sooner. Small group rooms outside of kind of flexible classroom spaces outside of the traditional classroom that allows classrooms to flow in and out of those. And then some selective replacement of and improvements of the exterior skin, window replacements, some ventilation upgrades to the locker rooms and gymnasium there. Out at Lincoln Elementary School, secure front entrances, that was a commonality amongst all the schools, is looking at that security component of how can we better secure, whether it's secure the school building, whether it's through access control at each of the doors, providing a more secure entry process where during the school day the people would have to go through a receptionist to get into the school building, so that you have a visual contact but also a face-to-face contact with everybody that comes and goes out of the school. So you'll see that actually on all of the sites, that secure front entrances was one of the key priorities. Tornado shelters, Lincoln has tunnels. They're not really, and I think has a tunnel and basement area that they use in the event of storm shelters. Those are not ideal to take kids down into during it, but it's better than nothing. Improved handicap accessibility, whether they're ramps into the building. Lincoln has a cafeteria down in the basement, has a few offices scattered throughout the school that are upstairs to go into. So, and it's also, being a 2-level building, look at putting in an elevator into the building so that you can make the building handicap accessible. What our latest proposal was to look at bringing the cafeteria out of the basement, so that you'd have basically a 2-stop elevator, and the basement would then just be for storage, or wouldn't be for student use.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned safe rooms added to the building. How does that work? Are you talking a separate room, or you talks here about added to a classroom?
Like a storm shelter?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, a lot of times it's typically you hope to never have to use the storm shelter, but inevitably we do in Kansas. But we multi-purpose, dual purpose the rooms, so that a room like this could be designed as a hardened storm shelter. We've got ways to even have windows in it that can have shutters over it or doors over it, and hardened structure, so that it may function as a classroom or a media center or a multi-purpose room, but also in the event of storms, it's the designated storm shelter. So they're not rooms that sit empty until a storm happens. They're rooms, and it's typically it would be in new construction. It's difficult to make an existing room, harden an existing room to a storm shelter capacity. So it would be new construction. In the Lincoln proposal, we had some additional classrooms that were added. So it would be one of those classrooms or two of those classrooms would be their structure would be built so that they're a hardened storm shelter.
Okay.
Similar to the rooms that were built at Hayes Middle School.
Yes, that's a good example,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, and then I guess the other thing I was wondering, because I saw this come up in several of the proposals about improved parking around the school. Is that, I'm just wondering if those are city streets, how does that play into the construction?
Several of the sites are pretty compact, and you're currently using a lot of city parking for cutback parking, off-street parking for, I know Lincoln specifically is a pretty compact site, primarily looking at, I think that one was primarily looking at some additional bus drop-off area to get the buses off the street to drop off and pick up students, and then also I think providing some additional parking, faculty parking on the site at Lincoln.
Okay.
But it wouldn't necessarily be improving, it wouldn't be improving public streets or anything like that, but it'd be trying to provide more parking on site for.
So utilizing some of the grounds area.
Correct, yeah. I mean, Lincoln's a really tricky site in just how
Yeah.
compact it is, and it's really landlocked with a neighborhood right around it. So that one, it still relied pretty heavily on using the neighborhoods and the streets for parking.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Laughlin, again, a storm shelter identifying, there was identifying a room, part of the addition that would be a storm shelter area. Larger cafeteria, this one we looked at, I think it was, I believe, a cafeteria and a cafeteria or gymnasium because they currently overflow into the cafeteria or overflow into the gym on a regular basis for lunch. Currently, I think there was the media center and computer lab were shared space. We had some moves that kind of shuffled around music and the computer media center room, and so that identifying dedicated rooms for those functions that have appropriate, in the case of music, have appropriate storage that's associated with that room. At O'Laughlin too, there's always, it was not part of, or it was the final scenario wasn't part of this, but figuring out currently you use the high school, whether a new road needs to be just the traffic congestion that happens on a daily basis there, and the use that you maintain with the Catholic school there of their drives, and whether an additional whether it's a city street or a private school drive around the building. But looking at those kind of in addition to the facilities, looking at site circulation needs.
And another question, sorry.
Mhm.
Just
No problem.
Go through
That's-
this. So
that's what-
wasn't You mentioned this fencing around the perimeter. Did that include the wilderness, the outdoor learning part about the wicked big puddle that's back there?
I don't know. I don't recall specifically if that that might have been something that got put in by the facility needs committee, specifically how, to what extent was fenced. So I don't know that answer right now.
Yeah, just it's bigger or smaller.
I mean, part of what but this is really updating you guys from where we've been. When we're ready to move forward, we'll obviously need to revisit all of these and at each building, and some of the work. I know the roofs have been continuing to progress through capital outlay. Ceiling and finish improvements have been progressing, and some mechanical upgrades have been made at some of the schools. So we'll obviously need to revisit all these items and ensure that what we're moving forward with is still, one, hasn't been done, or is still what the current direction is.
Okay.
Roosevelt, again, gym and cafeteria are currently shared. Looking at adding a new gym the way this is situated, potentially could be a gym that has after-hours use to it. It can have its, develop its own entrance on the south end of the building there. Roosevelt also because of Washington, and when this was done, Washington was, or currently Washington's been converted into an early childhood center, and a lot of those students are getting dispersed out into other schools. Roosevelt, because it had the biggest site grounds around it, was identified as going from I think going up 2 sections, so adding significant classroom space on the north side of the building there. Washington, again, when this was written, it was intended to keep it as a small school. We've since gone forward and converted it to an early childhood center over some work over the past summer. So that is one thing. Washington and Wilson will be ones that will specifically need to change because of how they were programmed at the time and how their use has changed. Again, Wilson, it had room to expand classroom space on site, so it would have a expanded classroom space, and it was identified also as a location for more of a district-wide special education wing component to this building. And then you see in the plans that it developed its own. It had special education and early childhood in it, and had its own entrance off the east corner of the building there. Other facilities that we looked at the early childhood connections programs that are both here in this building or across in the adjacent building. We went out to Munger. Looked at what happens with the admin in this building. They're really consider this building's considerably larger than what the needs of the facility need or the space needs of the admin are. And so, is there better solutions to integrating them into another school facility site, or is there off-site location that's better sized, more adequately sized for the needs of the admin? And then really, I mean, a lot of, in this, and I just briefed on a lot of the classroom space, but going back to the needs of the special education population, you've seen significant growth in special education students that need additional services and the classroom spaces that are required for that. And so each school within the body of classroom additions or classroom reconfigurations has increased more area for special education, whether it's of all levels, whether it's just any student with an IEP essentially. So this kind of revisiting just in general, I went through each building. This slides, I'd actually reordered these slides to put them at the front, but kind of the 3 components that we really looked at were the educational space, the safety and security, and then that deferred maintenance component of each of the schools. And through those, looking at how can we, the last bond issue for the high school last major bond issue was in 1979. And so how can we look, and that's 35 years ago now, so how can we look at setting the district on course for the next 20 to 30 years? These next few slides just generally go through some of the what I talked about on the specific slides, but the undersized auditorium and stage areas, special education, PE being physical education time shared with other school functions, and limited, seeing an increase in the industrial arts components at the upper levels of school. So kind of those solutions for the educational space was, again, that auditorium that was the 8 to 900 seat auditorium, expanding special education, building new gymnasiums or cafeterias. Several of them would be, those spaces would be storm shelters. Industrial arts program, and then through it, there's kind of a shift of not everything will be. I mean, there'll be some new classroom space, but then also some recouping of some general classroom space that was previously used. As special education moves around and other programs move around, you can recoup some of the larger classroom spaces. The safety and security, again, the front entrances, being able to secure the buildings through access control, or secure the doors through access control and secure the front entrance, looking at ADA accessibility throughout the buildings, whether they're stairs, two-level buildings that need an elevator, accessibility in the restrooms, door handles, things like that fall into that accessibility requirements. It was Lincoln and Washington, although Lincoln's really the only two-level facility now that would look at adding an elevator to. And then the deferred maintenance program, that's, as I said, the district has been very diligent over the last 30 years of maintaining and keeping the facilities that they have up to date, and or maintaining facilities. Some of the stuff just gets old. The pictures here show just the one on the left is the windows at O'Laughlin, all the caulking around them. It's like a glazed window system at your home that has failed. Masonry, significant movement in masonry that's allowed water to get in at some of the buildings that, if not checked and dealt with, can cause further problems down the road. Again, a lot of this, the roofs, the lighting upgrades throughout a lot of the facilities, the maintenance of systems has been done really well over the last years. It's just with capital outlay, it's money has there's not been enough essentially money in capital outlay to do everything that needs. And then they're also running up against a lot of this equipment is approaching 20 or 30 years old, and that's met its effective useful life, where you're starting to have to source parts either through third parties or used parts, or you're having to completely replace equipment, and it's starting to be significant equipment replacement costs. And so looking at, and then other, just some of our mechanical engineers gone through and met with both Rusty and Francis and identified piping that needed to be, old steel piping that's completely corroded and needs to be replaced. Again, things that have been on that deferred maintenance capital outlay plan that would be dealt with through a bond issue. As I said, operational costs, looking at new equipment would obviously be greatly more energy efficient than what is currently there. It's not replacing every single piece of equipment in the district. That's would not be advisable to do. You've got a lot of great equipment that's still in serviceable life. Again, but it would also, by doing a lot of these things through the bond issue, would free up that money so that you're not completely depleting capital outlay costs year after year. The next, I've got kind of some, and I can go through this, or we can not. It really, each of these, we have site plans for each of the school facilities, and they may be easier to view on your
Yeah, I don't know
tablets there, if we even need to go through it, because it's,
they have access to them.
yeah. And like I said, we're available for questions today. We're available for questions anytime. Kind of the, looking at the numbers in brief that we looked at, we're right around $100 million for an all-encompassing bond issue package. Chuck and I have been talking that we need to check those, make sure that the scope of work that we're still looking at is still accurate, and then recheck our numbers because we've seen construction costs have started to go up. There's about a 3 to 4% escalation per year, and we've built a lot of that into, from when we started doing this, we've built that into the costs. If we go a lot further, another year out or a lot further out, we need to revisit those costs, and we will revisit those costs just to make sure that we're not, that we're providing you an accurate budget for that. And then the financial, Piper Jaffray will put forth, I think it's in here, they talk about the different options for 20-year, 25 or 30-year bond issues and what that looks like from a monthly payment standpoint from a resident. But they would get more into that when we identify what that final number is. So kind of what I think the main juxta of what we're here tonight is to look at what's next in terms of if you decide to move forward with a bond issue, kind of what that time frame looks like. There's about a 90-day, some of the tasks that need to happen is that the board needs to make a resolution to move forward with a bond issue. From there, the state has some requirements and some documentation that we would generate that would start to spell out what work is going to be accomplished in the bond issue. The bond council would write language for the bond issue, and you guys would obviously review all this throughout the process. But it's 90 days is not a hard and fast, but that's what we typically see for a turnaround from the day you, if you want to run a bond election, step back 90 days and start the process as a minimum time frame. Obviously, in there's components of community information, getting information out about the bond issue. I know it's been in the news over the last several years about the work that the board and the needs committee has been doing, and so I think the community is aware that it's been discussed, that it's a continued discussion point. And so that's kind of what, and we would work with probably once we move forward would work with you guys to have a workshop that would work with the board, would start to identify if there were committees that needed to, if information campaign was felt necessary, identify whether we pull some of the people that served on the needs committee, pull them in as kind of a information team to get information out to the community about the bond issue. We see that happen in several different ways. Sometimes it's a totally volunteer committee. Sometimes the board takes it on, but it's really it's not me that's out selling the bond issue. It's you guys that are out there informing the community about it. There's a lot that can happen through the district website. Information, you put information out on district website about educating the community about the bond issue. And we would kind of, as we move forward, we've got a team that would come in and help kind of facilitate more in a workshop setting of what do we really need to do to start to move forward, and do we need a big information campaign, or is information sufficiently out there, and can we progress with kind of refining this information, making sure that it's accurate for what we need, and then put that information out for the community to inform them about the bond issue. Other things that decisions that need to be made, type of election. I don't believe there's any general election this fall in Hayes. And so you would be, if you're looking for something this fall, you'd be looking at a special election. Your next general election is going to get into the April elections, and then primaries, and of next year. So if you look at, and then within a special election, there's special election where you walk in and vote, there's mail-in ballots, there's pros and cons for each of those as to how best to get a good voter turnout. So we'd help work through, answer some of those questions. And
What do you guys need? I mean, we'll have, obviously, the whole board needs to be involved in that, but what do you need for us to identify if we're going to go forward with anything? What scope?
I'll speak
Go
one
ahead.
thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to get a kind of an updated cost, because as you pointed out, there have been some great effort to improve the physical plant with some of the capital outlay and the shifting of Washington and some of the other
Right.
things have changed, and maybe that will have lowered or at least we wouldn't have gone up despite the
Yes,
increase
correct,
of
yeah.
construction costs. That would be one thing I would want to see.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's really our next step is, I mean, if generally what's been discussed and what's in the information is the general direction, aside from the changes that we know need to happen at Washington and Wilson from what they were proposed, and then talking with Dean and Rusty as well about what's been accomplished through capital outlay or what maintenance has been accomplished over the last year, really, that either was in the bond issue or wasn't in the bond issue. And then if there's anything else, any other issues that have arisen from then to now.
Yeah. I guess another question I have, and maybe I've just not up on it. You mentioned FEMA, and I know that, are there any federal grants or things that have to do with upgrading to a better
Those
safe
have-
school or safe school?
Yeah,
grants?
those have pretty much dried up.
Okay, I wasn't sure
No,
where that was at.
in Topeka, there's the Topeka School District is doing a significant bond issue that is putting FEMA shelters in, and I don't believe they're getting any
Okay.
federal funds for any of that. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago, we had a couple projects that had FEMA shelters that had pretty significant funds, federal dollars, but those have since dried up.
Okay. Or anything related, because you mentioned school security, and I don't know if there's any funds in that area for the entryway security or realigning offices. to
I'm
help
not
with-
aware of anything.
That'd be something we'd look at.
Yeah,
in
I'm just
great
curious
detail.
about that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know that at one time there was some of that, but
It's probably all.
a lot of it's dried up. but-
I know I have seen in some limited cases, some local sort of emergency management type dollars that have been put towards facilities through grants that are for either security upgrades or storm shelter upgrades.
Right. And this is just kind of a general question, is that you said that this lays us out for 20 to 30 years, and we've got one building, it's a 1925 construction. Will these enhancements give us another 30 years in those, or are there some that we should say it may not be worth the investment to go that way?
Well,
And I
Go
don't
ahead,
know.
Dean.
well, I was going to say, and one of them, I mean, when we looked at Lincoln,
Yeah.
at one time, we had talked about adding classroom additions and doing all that through this committee, and thought, well, that probably isn't the thing we need to do, and looked at adding the space for the gym, just because every elementary has the same issues with the shared gym for music and lunch, PE, everything, and the scheduling is a nightmare. And when we talked about some of that, doing a gym there, that would be something that could be used into the future, but the classrooms probably didn't. At one time, we looked at classrooms, did make a lot of sense, and then looking at Wilson, Roosevelt, increasing those. But,
Yeah, and we didn't, in everything that we walked through the buildings, we didn't see anything that we threw our hands up and said, there's no hope for this facility. Like I said, stuff's been maintained. I went to a school that's 125 years old, so the older buildings, if they've got good bones to them and they've been well maintained, they're going to last another 50 years.
All right.
It's just,
How
yeah.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to-
In the table that you have with the cost for renovations and additions, do those include wants and needs, or is it just the needs, or what is that?
These right here?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that was, and I have to go back because I know some of this was,
I thought we had those broke down separately, actually.
yeah, they're,
I guess I have a follow-up to that question too, that maybe, did we prioritize as far as what were essentials that we needed to get done in a short term versus more like long-term desirable projects, that we could break out the cost that way too?
yeah, and we've done, and I don't have it in here and I don't have it with me, but I can send it to Dean because I know we did kind of prioritize list through that process of, and that may be how the needs and wants
Were broke down.
flushed out is through that prioritized list. And so I don't know exactly if there was because I'm looking at some of these things, and I know some of these under the wants are included in that overall number. So I can't say 100% of the wants are all included in that, but I can go back and get that information.
And I would assume
And also look at kind of what that.
Curious, like what those breakouts would
What
be.
what that priority
I mean, if
list
there was
add.
a list of like, we have to do this, this has to be fixed, that type of thing.
Yeah, no, I can get that.
Well, I hope that helped. I mean, you guys understand a little bit of what we have, and I mean, you can ask Zach anything, but now it's a lot of planning on our part and figuring out how we want to proceed, if we want to proceed and do those things. I know there's a whole lot of other information, a million scenarios, setting priorities. Do we look at bits and pieces and phase in a lot of those things? But did you have a question, Elizabeth?
I was just curious, I'm not sure if this is the time to ask, but, when we talked about different types of election, what are the costs to us for something like that? Because I don't want to
I
endure a lot of
think-
costs and then
I
fail.
think when we did the local option budget, maybe 2 years ago, it was just right under $20,000. And that
For the
was,
mailing?
yeah.
And I think I had checked into that, and again, don't have that information here tonight, but we can revisit that, looking at, with a mail-in, that's probably your most expensive, just because you've got postage that's associated with it. Obviously, the most cost-effective is to fall in a general election, but there's other factors that play into, do you want to fall into a general election cycle, or do you want to fall into everything else that goes on during a general election, or do you want to steer clear of all those politics? And there's within the special elections, there's the option to do a walk-in or the mail-in, and we can again help. I'll go revisit those costs associated with that. A lot of the costs, especially for it really comes down to the number of ballots that they have to either distribute, or that they distribute, that they print and then either mail out or have available.
I was just thinking that might change our time frame a little bit too. I know you mentioned the workshops and informing the community and a very informational campaign. I guess I may know nothing, but personally, I just feel that's going to be a very large component. I know a lot of that is on this side of the table. That stuff maybe we need to do, and I don't know exactly how. But
And we would help you guys kind of bring those, identify what committees are needed, what people.
There'll be a lot of options to look at and how we want to do that.
because people in general will pick and choose, and they're going to pick and choose and see big numbers and increased taxes, and that's where it's going to stop. And I don't want that. So.
Yeah. I think, and that's really where important in the kind of the information side of things, and identifying that these are identified needs that haven't just been identified by me, but have been looked at faculty, staff level, but then also the Facility Needs Committee was a pretty diverse group of constituents in the community that looked at for themselves, toured and interviewed and met with staff for themselves to identify what those needs were.
So timeline-wise, based off of what type of election and stuff, does that shift kind of our next move? Is that the next thing we need to be looking at?
The other thing, I guess to tag on to that, the other thing that's kind of tricky too, you have to be, I think it's 60 days, if you want to run a special election, I think you're 60 days outside, you have to be 60 days outside of a general election. And then approaching the holidays, which sounds strange to say here in August, but we're approaching the holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas. You want to hit a time when people are attentive and are around, and so we kind of steer away from the really Thanksgiving through the New Year, just because you've got a million other things going on that we want people to be focused on, or to know, be informed about the bond issue and make a informed decision about it. So if you're looking at kind of the immediate future, meaning the next 8 months, we're 90 days out from November 3rd right now, and then you can push again. That 90 days isn't hard and fast. There's about 30 to 45 days that is wrapped up with state review, and sometimes there's some back and forth on providing the information that the state requires. But again, we assist with that, and the bond council assists with generating that language and providing all the information that the state needs. Getting into January, you get back to school, then we're 1st of February, you start to be 60 days out from any April general elections. So if you're looking at the next 8 months, there's certain windows that you can do stuff in, and obviously you can do information anytime you want, but in terms of official electioneering, there's certain windows that we'd need to hit.
Zach, how are HTK's fees considered in all of this?
They're part of a percentage of the overall bond issue work, and it's included in the costs identified for the bond issue. So that $100 million, our fees, our engineers' fees, geotech construction testing, permit fees, all those kind of soft costs that are outside of construction are included in that. And through the bond council would help identify, you're not getting $100 million on the day you pass the bond issue. There's this through probably about a 30-month time frame of all of design from start to finish of all this scope of work. There'd be a kind of a staged sale of the bonds, so that it also staggers the mill levy some. So it's.
And Zach, I had mentioned this today, about the contract that we have with HTK. Did you have a chance to?
I haven't looked at that with Chuck yet, but we'll look at it.
Okay.
Get back with you. I think it's structured that, we as we move forward, it's not all encompassing right now, but as we move forward, the funds for a new contract would be, or the funds for the design work would be as part of the bond issue.
Anything else for Zach, or anything? We will obviously keep this in the forefront. We won't spend this much time every meeting, but I think, like we had talked about, having a special meeting to sit down and have this discussion and kind of lay out at least what we want to do, how we want to proceed, and then start setting all those things as we go. But,
yeah, and I'll revisit and send Dean some of the information. We had kind of this is a 42-page or 42-slide presentation, a lot to take in, and especially when you go out and start talking to people, nobody wants to see a 42-page slide show. But we developed kind of a 2-page summary document that identifies kind of school by school, facility by facility, and what those needs are and what's considered in the scope of work. And so I'll send that up to Dean. I'll go back and gather some of that information, send that to Dean so that you can have that, maybe start to just better inform you guys as you start to talk about it as well. So, and like I said, we're always available for questions, or if you've got an idea that said, why aren't we doing it this way? We can either say that we've already looked at that, we've looked at numerous, and probably 10 different scenarios of building some brand new schools to just meeting the maintenance needs, to I think what we've settled on really is, yeah, it's a big number, but it is, it meets the maintenance needs, and it meets the program needs, and it meets those security needs to move forward with. So,
Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is discussion by board members and agenda requests. We have a couple of things. A few things that I basically just a lot of concerns about enrollment, which we talked a little bit before. Middle school, the online enrollment. I just had a lot of questions from people stating they wanted to enroll but couldn't. Had issues finding the page. I know Wilson and a few of the other ones had huge links on the page, but I know the middle school, from what I was told, it was kind of tough to find. Also heard from several people that called the middle school to ask how they needed to go about enrolling, and were basically told by the secretary they had no idea. I was told by a couple of them that they ended up talking to someone who claimed they did accounting there, was who actually showed them. I guess a couple things I had, and I don't know, and I guess maybe to get some clarification for them. Do we go through any type of mock enrollments with the staff as far as getting them step-by-step procedures as far as how to do this stuff when they call, any of that type of stuff?
Done training with secretaries and everybody about enrollment, and then when the InfoSnap and Power School issue didn't come up.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's where the glitch was. But I think, the procedure that we're using has worked pretty darn good, really. It's just a matter of getting that information to parents. And again, that's what I was
And I
saying.
think that may have been some of the
Yeah.
confusion. A lot of them
Yes,
said
that
that
not knowing-
they didn't know it was down. We didn't really know
Exactly.
notifications or.
That too, like I guess like the InfoSnap codes that we had to use. I don't know if that was standard to have to use them, or if that was like the roundabout procedure for that day. But I was out of town, and so another mom got my kids' snap codes and took a picture of them and sent them to me so I could enroll. So, but it was, yeah, there was like, if those snap codes could have been emailed out or sent out to parents
Yeah, I don't know
beforehand.
about that.
Well, it was supposed to be through your Power School sign-on, and
Yeah.
that's where it failed. And then we did realize, wait, we don't have to like start paper copy. We were at that point, we did realize you could backdoor, work around and go through InfoSnap directly. We have a Sign Friday in the middle school now, since they haven't enrolled. We didn't realize this till after elementary. We are able to send to parents an email with their snap code information. So that's just something, we had never done that before, we were troubleshooting. So that, the middle school and high school parents should have received that. If not, I'm sure they contact the school. Those should have been sent out by this morning. Again, it was more of a learning experience with the elementary, and I think it was rough getting started at first, but they seemed to, that was the report from the elementary principals today, so.
Good.
We did say we need to reevaluate after we shut down enrollment and get school started and say what could have been, we didn't train on what if and the plan B, but we wish we would have thought about that now.
And then, I think, I can't remember if it would be Tracy or Cheryl. I know in the past, on the checks that were signed each month, we kind of talked about in the past, there was kind of a journal of sorts provided to the board, like for POs and stuff like that. I'm not sure why we ever stopped getting those, but I know we had kind of talked in the past. Is there any way that we could start getting those included?
Yes, that's attached to this agenda.
Okay, is it on there already? Okay, I hadn't
Yeah.
gone through the whole piece on that, so I just wanted to make sure that those were on there.
Yep.
I know we had talked
We are
about them,
going to be
so-
providing that every month, so you can see the full list.
Perfect, perfect. Any other requests or discussion? Okay. Dean, I think we do need exec session.
Or negotiations.
We'll go ahead and make a motion to enter into exec session for a period of, we'll start with 30 minutes to begin at 7:50 and at 8:20 to include, and I guess I need to ask too, because we're going to be discussing leave, salary, 403B, and insurance, and I know Board Member Adams and Board Member O'Borney stated they wanted to recuse themselves, so I didn't know if I need to do the whole board or if you two will be participating in the discussions.
I mean, I might add some in discussion, but if it gets too much of a, we're gonna vote on, or we're gonna discuss particular stuff.
Well, we won't be voting, it'll all be discussion, but I know you guys had said that, so that's the
Yeah.
reason I'm asking.
Is it just information, or?
We're going to be going over what we're going to be relaying to them.
I'll
and
read,
stuff.
you can take me out for that.
Okay. And Luke?
I can sit down, it doesn't matter, that's fine.
Okay. So then I guess to include board members other than Board Member Adams and Board Member O'Borney, also to include the superintendent, assistant superintendent, director of finance, director of curriculum, board attorney, and I believe negotiator Greg Schwartz is here as well for the purposes of negotiations. Have a motion or two. Second, I guess. Okay. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 4-0.
So,
Yes.
to come back, you still need board members to continue executive session.
Well, I would assume you guys will still be down here.
Yes,
So,
we'll be down.
and if we go into anything else, then we'll probably
Yeah,
go through and make a
I just
motion
want
to
to-
include you guys as well.
Not sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So we